My mother-in-law told everyone I trapped her son with a baby. Then she saw my baby's recent photos and she broke down crying, begging for another chance. His mother, Paulette, had other ideas about our relationship from the start. She thought Arlo could do better. She thought I wasn't pretty enough or successful enough or good enough for her perfect son. She smiled at me during family dinners, but I could feel her judging everything I said and did. She made comments about my job not paying enough. She made comments about my apartment being too small. She made comments about my family not being as established as theirs. She never said anything directly insulting, but the message was clear. I was beneath her son, and she was waiting for him to realize it. Arlo defended me whenever he noticed his mother's behavior. He told her I was the love of his life and she needed to accept that. She would apologize and promise to try harder. Then she would go right back to making subtle digs the next time we saw her. I learned to ignore it because I loved Arlo and marrying him meant dealing with his mother. I thought things would get better after the wedding. They got worse. 2 years into our marriage, I got pregnant. Arlo was thrilled. He cried when I showed him the positive test and immediately started planning the nursery. He told everyone he knew that he was going to be a father. He was genuinely excited in a way that made me fall in love with him all over again. Paulette's reaction was different. When we announced the pregnancy at a family dinner, she didn't smile. She didn't congratulate us. She just looked at me with cold eyes and asked how far along I was. I said 8 weeks. She counted backward on her fingers like she was trying to catch me in something. Then she said it was awfully convenient timing. Arlo asked what she meant. She said nothing and changed the subject. The comments started after that dinner. Paulette began telling family members that I trapped her son. She said I got pregnant on purpose to lock him into the marriage before he could change his mind. She said women like me used babies as insurance policies. She said Arlo was too naive to see what I was doing and someone needed to open his eyes. I found out because Arlo's cousin mentioned it during a baby shower. She thought I already knew what Paulette was saying. She thought Arlo had confronted his mother about it. He hadn't because he didn't know. His mother was careful to spread her lies only to people she thought wouldn't tell us. I told Arlo everything that night. He was furious. He called his mother and demanded an explanation. She denied saying anything negative. She said his cousin must have misunderstood. She said she would never accuse me of something so terrible. She cried about being attacked unfairly, and somehow Arlo ended up apologizing to her for the confrontation. Our daughter was born in spring. She came out looking exactly like Arlo. Same nose, same chin, same unusual eye color that ran in his family. Same birthmark on her left shoulder that Arlo had too. The nurses commented on how strongly she resembled her father. The doctors joked that I did all the work, and she came out as his twin. Everyone who saw her said the same thing. Everyone except Paulette. When she visited the hospital, she held our daughter for less than a minute before handing her back. She said the baby looked small. She said the baby looked nothing like Arlo did as an infant. She said sometimes babies look like one parent at first, but that changes as they grow. She planted seeds of doubt in a room full of people who could clearly see the resemblance. Over the next few months, Paulette escalated her campaign. She told extended family members she wasn't sure the baby was really Arlo's. She suggested I might have cheated and passed off another man's child as her son's. She recommended that Arlo get a paternity test before he got too attached. She said these things to aunts and uncles and cousins while smiling at me during Sunday dinners. Arlo heard about it from multiple relatives this time. Too many people reported the same comments for Paulette to deny. When he confronted her again, she admitted she had concerns. She said a mother has a right to protect her son. She said the baby didn't look like him no matter what everyone else claimed. She said she would feel better if there was a test to confirm things. She said if I had nothing to hide, I should welcome the chance to prove her wrong. Arlo looked at his mother and then looked at our daughter sleeping in my arms. Our daughter who had his exact face. Our daughter who everyone in the world could see was his child. He told his mother that if she needed a test to believe him, then she didn't trust him at all. He told her that demanding proof when the evidence was sleeping right in front of her showed she didn't want to be proven wrong. She wanted to be right more than she wanted a relationship with her grandchild. He told her that until she apologized to me sincerely and stopped spreading lies, she wasn't welcome in our home. Paulette said he was choosing me over his own mother. Arlo said he was choosing his wife and daughter over someone who couldn't accept them. She stormed out expecting him to call her within days and take it back. He didn't call. Weeks passed, then months. Since Arlo cut off his mother, life settled into a comfortable rhythm that felt lighter than anything we'd experienced since I got pregnant. Imogen started doing these little things that made my heart feel too big for my chest. She'd grab at her toes and make these gurgling sounds that weren't quite laughs but close enough. Arlo would come home from work and she'd kick her legs when she heard his voice. We'd spend evenings on the floor with her between us, watching her discover her hands like they were the most amazing things in the world. Nobody was questioning whether she was really his daughter. Nobody was spreading lies about me. Nobody was making me feel like I had to prove myself every time I walked into a room. My mom came over one Saturday morning with bags of groceries and that determined look she gets when she's decided to take care of someone. She made breakfast while I fed Imogen, then shooed me toward the shower while she cleaned up. When I came back, she had Imogen on a blanket doing tummy time and was making those encouraging sounds that grandmas make. I sat down next to them and just watched for a minute. My mom glanced over at me and her face softened in that way that meant she was about to ask something I probably didn't want to answer. She asked how I was really doing with everything. Not the surface answer I gave everyone else, but the truth. Something about the way she said it, so gentle and knowing, just broke something open in me. I started crying right there on the living room floor. Not pretty crying either. The kind where your face gets all red and your nose runs and you can't catch your breath properly. She pulled me against her shoulder and let me sob while Imogen kicked happily on her blanket, completely unaware that her mom was falling apart 3 feet away. I told her I was so tired of being the villain in a story I didn't write. I did nothing wrong except fall in love with someone whose mother hated me, and somehow I became the bad guy. People still looked at me weird at family gatherings before we stopped going. People still whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. Paulette had poisoned so many people against me with her lies, and even though Arlo cut her off, I still felt the damage every day. My mom held me tighter and said that Paulette's lies said everything about Paulette's character and nothing about mine. She said any reasonable person could look at Imogen and see she was Arlo's daughter. She said the people who chose to believe accusations over evidence weren't worth my tears. She said I was a good mother and a good wife, and Paulette's jealousy and control issues were her problem to fix, not mine to carry. I cried harder because I needed to hear that so badly. Later that afternoon, after my mom left, Arlo's phone rang. It was Fletcher, and I could hear the tension in Arlo's voice when he answered. He listened for a long time, his jaw getting tighter with each passing second. When he hung up, he looked angrier than I'd seen him in weeks. Fletcher had called to warn us that Paulette was making the rounds with extended family members. She wasn't apologizing or taking responsibility for anything she'd said about me. Instead, she was positioning herself as the victim. She was telling people how hurt she was. She was saying we were keeping her only grandchild away from her for no good reason. She was crying to aunts and uncles about how her son had chosen his wife over his own mother. She was leaving out every single thing she'd done to cause this situation. Arlo paced across the living room, his hands clenched into fists. He said his mother still wasn't getting it. She still thought she was the wronged party in this situation. She'd spent months accusing me of trapping him with a baby, months suggesting I'd cheated, months demanding paternity tests when our daughter had his exact face. And now she wanted sympathy because he'd finally set a boundary. I watched him pace and felt something shift in my chest. We'd been reactive this whole time, just responding to whatever Paulette did next. Maybe it was time to be proactive. I said we needed to control the narrative before his mother twisted it completely. Arlo stopped pacing and looked at me. I said we should tell people exactly what happened. Not the sanitized version, not the polite version, but the truth about what his mother said and did. He thought about it for a minute, then nodded. He pulled out his phone and opened the family group chat. He spent 20 minutes typing, his thumbs moving fast across the screen. When he showed me what he'd written, it was detailed and clear. He explained exactly why we'd established boundaries with his mother. He listed the accusations she'd made about me trapping him. He detailed the lies she'd spread about my fidelity. He described her demand for paternity tests despite obvious evidence. He made it clear that this estrangement was a direct consequence of her choices and her refusal to apologize sincerely. He sent the message before either of us could second-guess it. The responses started coming in within minutes. Some family members expressed support and said they'd suspected Paulette wasn't telling the whole truth. Others sent messages saying we should forgive family no matter what they do. A few said they had no idea things were that bad. Then River texted back and I watched Arlo's face turn red as he read it. His brother said we were being dramatic. He said Paulette was just concerned. He said mothers have a right to protect their sons. Arlo typed back fast, his fingers hitting the screen harder than necessary. He said their mother accused his wife of infidelity and entrapment, not concern. He said those were serious accusations that damaged my reputation with everyone who heard them. He said River minimizing what happened showed exactly why they needed space from the whole family. The argument continued back and forth until Arlo finally muted the conversation and tossed his phone on the couch. 3 weeks later, something amazing happened. Imogen started sleeping through the night. Not just once, but consistently, 7 to 8 hours straight. I woke up one morning actually feeling rested for the first time since she was born. I could think clearly again. I could function like a normal person. I felt like myself returning bit by bit. I took her for her 6-month checkup on a Thursday morning. The pediatrician weighed her and measured her and did all the standard checks. She commented on how alert Imogen was, how she tracked movement with her eyes and responded to sounds. She said Imogen was healthy and developing perfectly. I felt this surge of pride sitting there in the exam room. Despite everything with Paulette, despite the stress and the lies and the family drama, my daughter was thriving. I was doing something right. In the waiting room afterward, I was gathering up the diaper bag and getting ready to leave when someone said my name. I looked up and saw one of Arlo's distant cousins standing there. She had a baby carrier in one hand and looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. She congratulated me on the baby, but she couldn't quite look me in the eye. Her gaze kept sliding away to the side, to the floor, to the receptionist desk. I realized immediately what was happening. She'd heard Paulette's version of events and didn't know what to believe. I could see it in the way she stood too far away, in the way she kept the conversation surface level, in the way she couldn't meet my eyes when she asked how old Imogen was now. Something clicked in me right there in that waiting room. I was done hiding. I was done feeling ashamed about lies someone else told. I pulled out my phone and opened my photo gallery. I walked closer to her and held out the phone, showing her recent pictures of Imogen. The cousin looked down at the screen and her whole face changed. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened slightly. She looked from the photo to Imogen in my arms and back to the photo. She said she didn't realize how much the baby looked like Arlo. She apologized for being weird, said she'd heard some things, but clearly they weren't true. She asked if she could see more pictures, and I showed her a dozen more, each one highlighting another feature Imogen shared with her father. The cousin left looking embarrassed and thoughtful. That evening, after Imogen went down for the night, I told Arlo about running into his cousin. I said I was tired of Paulette's lies still affecting how people treated me months later. I was tired of seeing doubt in people's eyes. I was tired of defending myself against accusations that should have never been made in the first place. Arlo listened and then suggested we start sharing more photos of Imogen on social media and in the family group chat. He said we should let the visual evidence speak for itself. If people could see how much she looked like him, they'd realize Paulette had been lying all along. We spent the next hour going through our photo gallery and selecting pictures. We chose ones that showed Imogen's face clearly, ones that highlighted her eye color, ones where the resemblance to Arlo was impossible to miss. We created a shared album and sent it to the extended family with a simple message about wanting to share our daughter's first 6 months. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Family members started commenting within minutes. They pointed out identical features. They said she had Arlo's nose, his chin, his eyes, his expressions. They posted old baby pictures of Arlo for comparison, and the similarities were striking. Several people sent private messages apologizing for doubting, saying they should have known better than to believe the accusations. The album got shared beyond just our immediate circle. Cousins showed it to their parents. Aunts sent it to uncles. Within a day, it seemed like everyone in Arlo's extended family had seen the photos. The next afternoon, Jacqueline texted me. She said the photos were circulating widely, and that several people were questioning why they ever believed Paulette's accusations in the first place. Then she added something that made my stomach flip. She said Paulette had seen the photos and became very emotional, but she didn't say what kind of emotional or what that meant. I didn't sleep well that night. Jacqueline's text kept running through my head. Paulette had seen the photos and become very emotional. I kept wondering what that meant. Was she crying because she realized how wrong she'd been, or was she just upset about missing out on her granddaughter? The difference mattered. One showed actual remorse. The other just showed regret about consequences. 2 days later, Arlo's phone rang during dinner. He looked at the screen and his whole body went stiff. He answered, and I heard Stuart's voice on the other end, loud enough that I could make out some words even though Arlo didn't have it on speaker. Stuart said Paulette had been crying constantly since seeing the recent pictures of Imogen. He said she wanted to come over and talk. He said they could be there in 20 minutes if we just gave them a chance. Arlo looked at me across the table. I shook my head. He told his father no. He said they weren't welcome in our home until his mother took real accountability for what she did. Stuart started arguing. Arlo cut him off and said spreading lies about me to the entire family wasn't something that could be fixed with one conversation. He said his mother had months to apologize sincerely, and she chose to double down on her accusations instead. Stuart said Paulette was suffering. Arlo said I suffered too when his mother told everyone I was a cheater who trapped him with someone else's baby. The call ended badly. Arlo sat there staring at his plate. Imogen made a happy noise from her bouncer, and he didn't even look up. The next few days were rough. Arlo went to work and came home looking exhausted. He'd hold Imogen for long stretches without saying much. I could see the stress piling up on him. His shoulders stayed tight. His jaw stayed clenched. He barely ate dinner. On Thursday, he came home 2 hours late. I'd already fed Imogen and put her down for the night. He walked in the door and just stood there in the hallway. I asked what happened. He said a major project at work failed. He said his boss blamed him even though the failure wasn't his fault. He said he'd spent the afternoon in meetings getting torn apart for someone else's mistakes. I hugged him and he just leaned against me like he was too tired to hold himself up. We sat on the couch and he pulled Imogen's baby blanket onto his lap. He held it and stared at nothing. I made him tea. He drank it cold an hour later because he forgot it was there. That night in bed, Arlo finally spoke. He said he'd been thinking about his mom more lately. He asked if we were being too harsh by maintaining complete no contact. My stomach dropped. I felt panic rise up in my chest because I wasn't ready to let Paulette back into our lives. But I also didn't want to be the reason Arlo was suffering. I asked what he meant. He said maybe we could consider letting his parents visit if his mother apologized. He said the estrangement was affecting him more than he expected. He said he missed his mom even though he was still angry at her. I sat up in bed. I reminded him that his mother spent months telling people I trapped him. I reminded him she suggested I cheated, and that Imogen wasn't his. I reminded him she recommended he get a paternity test like our daughter's face wasn't proof enough. He said he knew all that. He said he wasn't trying to excuse what she did. He said he was just struggling with the whole situation. We argued. It was our first real fight about his mother since he cut her off. Arlo said maybe we could do supervised visits if she gave a proper apology. I said her tears over photos didn't erase months of calling me a liar. I said crying because she missed her granddaughter wasn't the same as being sorry for destroying my reputation. He said he understood that, but maybe we could at least hear her out. I got out of bed. I told him his mother hadn't actually done anything to earn forgiveness yet. I said she was sad about consequences, but that didn't mean she understood the harm she caused. He said I was right, but he was tired of being caught between his wife and his mother. I said I was tired of being painted as the villain for protecting myself and our daughter from someone who spread vicious lies about me. We went back and forth. Neither of us raised our voices because Imogen was sleeping in the next room. But the anger was there, sharp and real between us. I slept on the couch that night. In the morning, Arlo came out and sat next to me. He apologized. He said he wasn't trying to pressure me. He said he was just struggling with missing his mom while also being angry at her. He said the stress from work was making everything feel harder. I told him I understood. I said I knew this situation was hurting him. I said I didn't want to be the reason he lost his relationship with his mother. He took my hand. He said any reconciliation would require genuine accountability from Paulette. Not just sadness about consequences, real acknowledgement of what she did and why it was wrong. He said I got final say on when and if she met Imogen. He said my comfort and safety mattered more than his mother's feelings. We sat there holding hands while the morning light came through the windows. I felt the tightness in my chest ease a little. Later that week, Natasha took me out for coffee. Arlo stayed home with Imogen. I needed to get out of the house. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't emotionally connected to Paulette. We sat in a corner booth and I told her everything. I told her about the phone call from Stuart. I told her about Arlo asking if we were being too harsh. I told her about our argument and how guilty I felt for maintaining boundaries. Natasha listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned forward. She reminded me that Paulette accused me of entrapment and infidelity to anyone who would listen. She reminded me that Paulette tried to convince Arlo to get a paternity test for a baby who obviously belonged to him. She said protecting myself and my daughter from that toxicity wasn't cruel. She said Paulette created this situation entirely on her own. She said I didn't owe forgiveness to someone who spent months trying to destroy my reputation and my marriage. I felt tears building up. She passed me napkins. She said being the bigger person didn't mean letting toxic people walk all over me. She said boundaries weren't punishment. They were protection. I went home feeling more grounded. Arlo and I sat down after Imogen went to sleep. We had a calmer conversation about what accountability would actually look like from his mother. We agreed it meant a direct apology to me. Not through other family members. Not through crying phone calls. A real face-to-face apology where she acknowledged specific harm she caused. We agreed it meant changed behavior over time. Not just one conversation where she said sorry and expected everything to go back to normal. We agreed she needed to correct the lies she spread. Tell the same people who heard her accusations that she was completely wrong. We wrote it all down. Clear expectations. No room for misunderstanding. Arlo said he'd communicate these requirements to his parents. He said if his mother wasn't willing to meet them, then the estrangement would continue. The weekend came. I took Imogen to the park near our apartment. She loved being outside. She'd kick her legs and make excited noises when she saw trees and birds. I took photos of her laughing in her stroller. Her smile was huge. Her eyes were bright. I posted the best photo on social media with a simple caption about enjoying the spring weather. Within an hour, several of Arlo's high school friends commented. They asked if we used a filter. They asked if genetics were really that strong. They said she was Arlo's clone. The post got shared. I saw it appear in the family group chat. I knew Paulette would see it. I didn't care anymore. That evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. But something made me pick up. Paulette's voice came through the speaker. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She kept saying she was wrong. She kept saying she needed to see her granddaughter. The words came out broken between gasps and crying. I stood there in my kitchen holding the phone away from my ear. I felt anger. I felt unexpected pity hearing her break down like this. She begged me to listen. She said she'd been looking at photos of Imogen all week. She said she realized how horrible she'd been. She couldn't eat. She just kept seeing her granddaughter's face and knowing she'd thrown away the chance to be part of her life. I took a breath. I told Paulette I couldn't have this conversation with her right now. I said if she wanted to apologize, she needed to do it properly. Not through a crying phone call that felt manipulative. She begged me not to hang up. She said she was sorry. She said it over and over. She said she'd been wrong about everything. I told her that sorry wasn't enough. I said she spent months calling me a liar and suggesting I cheated on her son. I said she tried to convince people that Imogen wasn't Arlo's baby when anyone with eyes could see the resemblance. I said she needed to take real accountability for that. Not just cry because she felt bad about missing out. She kept begging. Her voice got higher and more desperate. I ended the call. My hands were shaking. I put the phone down on the counter and just stood there trying to process what just happened. Arlo walked through the door 20 minutes later and found me sitting on the couch staring at nothing. He dropped his bag and came straight to me. He asked what was wrong. I told him his mother called. His face changed instantly. He got protective and angry in that way where his jaw tightens and his voice goes quiet. I explained the sobbing phone call and how Paulette begged me not to hang up. I told him about her saying she was wrong over and over without actually taking responsibility for the specific things she did. Arlo pulled out his phone right there. He called his father. Stuart answered on the second ring. Arlo told him that Paulette needed to respect our boundaries and stop making dramatic gestures that put pressure on me. He said calling me directly to cry wasn't appropriate, and that all communication needed to go through him. Stuart's voice came through the speaker loud enough for me to hear parts of it. He was defending Paulette. He said she was genuinely sorry, and that we were being cruel by keeping her from her only grandchild when she was clearly suffering. He said Paulette was devastated after seeing the photos and realized what she'd lost. Arlo lost his temper. He told his father that Paulette's suffering was a consequence of her own actions. He said she spent months calling me a liar and suggesting I cheated on him. He said she tried to convince people that Imogen wasn't his baby. He said calling his wife to sob about missing out wasn't an apology or accountability. Stuart tried to interrupt, but Arlo kept going. He said if his mother wanted back into our lives, she needed to take real responsibility for what she did. Not cry about how sad she felt. Not make me feel guilty for protecting myself and our daughter. Stuart said we were being unreasonable. Arlo ended the call. The next few days were tense in our apartment. Arlo was stressed about a project at work that was going badly. He was stressed about his family situation. I felt guilty even though I knew I shouldn't. I kept thinking about how I was the barrier between Arlo and his mother. I knew logically that Paulette caused the situation entirely. But watching Arlo struggle made me feel responsible anyway. Imogen picked up on our stress somehow. Babies can sense when their parents are upset. She became fussier than usual. She cried more. She didn't want to nap. She wanted to be held constantly. Taking care of a fussy baby while dealing with family drama and feeling guilty about all of it made everything harder. Arlo and I were both exhausted. We were short with each other in ways we normally weren't. Small things became arguments. I snapped at him for leaving dishes in the sink. He got annoyed when Imogen's crying woke him up at night. We apologized to each other, but the tension stayed. My phone rang on Thursday morning while I was feeding Imogen. Unknown number again. I almost didn't answer. But it was Jacqueline's voice when I picked up. She said she wanted to talk to me woman to woman about the situation. I hesitated. Jacqueline had been respectful of our boundaries. She hadn't pressured us before. She'd been kind when she visited. But I wasn't sure if this was going to be another attempt to make me feel bad about keeping Paulette away from Imogen. Jacqueline seemed to sense my hesitation. She promised she wasn't trying to guilt-trip me or convince me to do anything I wasn't comfortable with. I agreed to meet her the next day at a coffee shop near our apartment. I walked into the coffee shop Friday afternoon and found Jacqueline already sitting at a corner table. She'd ordered me a latte. We made small talk for a few minutes about Imogen and the weather. Then Jacqueline got to the real reason she wanted to meet. She told me that Paulette's breakdown after seeing the photos was genuine. She said Paulette had been telling family members she was wrong about me. She said Paulette was ashamed of what she said and didn't know how to fix it. I listened without interrupting. Jacqueline seemed sincere, but I wasn't ready to accept that Paulette's feelings made everything okay. I told Jacqueline that a real apology wasn't that complicated if someone genuinely meant it. I said Paulette knew how to reach us. She knew what she needed to do. Saying sorry to other family members didn't fix what she did to me. Jacqueline nodded like she understood. She admitted that Paulette struggles with admitting she's wrong. She said pride has always been Paulette's biggest flaw. She said Paulette wants to apologize, but doesn't know how to do it in a way that feels adequate for what she did. I felt my patience running out. I told Jacqueline that Paulette's pride wasn't my problem to manage. I said I wasn't going to make this easy for her when she spent months making my life terrible with her accusations. I reminded Jacqueline that Paulette told people I trapped her son with a baby, that she suggested I cheated, that she questioned whether Imogen was really Arlo's daughter, when anyone with eyes could see the resemblance. I said those weren't small mistakes or misunderstandings. Those were deliberate lies meant to damage my reputation and my marriage. Jacqueline looked down at her coffee. She said she understood why I was angry. She said she would be too. I went home after coffee and told Arlo about the conversation. He listened while bouncing Imogen on his knee. When I finished, he said his mother needed to do the hard work of a real apology without intermediaries. He said sending Jacqueline to feel out the situation wasn't taking responsibility. We talked for a while about what we actually wanted from Paulette. We agreed that if she wanted back into our lives, she needed to write me a letter. Not a text message, not a phone call. A real letter taking full accountability for her actions and their impact. She needed to acknowledge the specific things she said. She needed to explain why she said them. She needed to apologize for the damage she caused without making excuses. Arlo said he would communicate this requirement to his parents. He said if his mother wasn't willing to meet it, then the estrangement would continue. Arlo sent a text message to his father that evening. He made it clear that a written apology acknowledging specific harm was the first step. Not a guarantee of immediate reconciliation, just the first step. Stuart responded an hour later. He said they thought we were being unreasonable. He said demanding a written apology was excessive and formal. He said Paulette had already admitted she was wrong and we were punishing her by making her jump through hoops. Arlo read the message out loud to me. Then he typed back that if a sincere apology was too much to ask, they could continue the estrangement. He said we weren't interested in half measures or fake reconciliation. Stuart didn't respond after that. 2 weeks passed with no letter. I started to think Paulette's breakdown was just about her own feelings of missing out. Not genuine remorse about what she did to me. She was sad about not knowing her granddaughter. But she wasn't actually sorry for calling me a liar and destroying my reputation with her accusations. Arlo seemed both relieved and disappointed. I could tell he was hoping his mother would step up. He wanted to believe she was capable of real accountability. But as the days went by with nothing from her, he started accepting that maybe she wasn't. We stopped talking about it as much. Life went back to normal routines. Imogen learned to roll over from her back to her stomach. We celebrated that milestone without thinking about Paulette at all. Then a letter arrived in the mail on a Tuesday afternoon. I recognized the return address immediately. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The paper inside was nice stationery with Paulette's name printed at the top. Her handwriting covered 3 full pages. I sat down on the couch before I started reading. The letter detailed every accusation she made against me. She wrote about telling family members I trapped Arlo with a pregnancy. She wrote about suggesting I cheated and passed off another man's child as her son's. She wrote about recommending a paternity test when Imogen's resemblance to Arlo was obvious to everyone. She admitted she was wrong about all of it. She acknowledged that she tried to turn family against me because she didn't think I was good enough for her son. She wrote that she felt threatened by how much Arlo loved me and how complete our little family seemed without her input or approval. The letter included an apology for questioning Imogen's paternity when the resemblance was obvious to everyone. She wrote that she was looking for reasons to be right, rather than accepting the truth. She admitted she wanted me to be wrong about everything, because it would prove her initial judgment of me was correct. She wrote that seeing recent photos made her realize she'd missed months of her granddaughter's life because of her own pride and cruelty. She said she was ashamed of herself. She said she understood if I never forgave her, but she needed me to know she was wrong about me from the very beginning. The words sat heavy on the paper in my hands. I read the letter 3 times. Parts of it felt real. Parts of it felt like what someone would write if they knew what they were supposed to say. Words are easy. Changed behavior is what actually matters. I carried the letter to the kitchen where Arlo was feeding Imogen mashed sweet potatoes. He looked up when I walked in, and I handed him the pages without saying anything. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and started reading. I watched his face change as he went through each paragraph. His eyes got wet. His jaw tightened. When he finished, he set the letter down carefully on the counter and just stared at it for a long moment. He said it was the most accountable he'd ever seen his mother be about anything. He said she'd never admitted being wrong so completely before. He said maybe she was actually capable of change. I told him I wanted to believe that, but we needed to be careful. He agreed immediately. He said we couldn't just let her back into our lives because she wrote a good apology. We needed to see if she meant it through her actions over time. We sat at the kitchen table after Imogen went down for her nap and talked through what came next. The letter was a good first step. But we weren't ready for in-person contact yet. We needed to see if Paulette would actually do the work of rebuilding trust, or if this was just another manipulation. Arlo called his mother that evening. I sat next to him on the couch so I could hear both sides of the conversation. He told her we received the letter and appreciated the apology. He said rebuilding trust would take time and require her to demonstrate changed behavior with family members. There was silence on the other end for several seconds. Then Paulette said she understood. She said she would do whatever it took. She said she knew she'd destroyed any right to immediate forgiveness, and she accepted that. Her voice sounded different from I'd ever heard it. Smaller, less certain. Arlo asked her to start correcting the lies she'd spread about me with every family member who'd heard them. He said if she was serious about making amends, she needed to actively repair the damage she'd done to my reputation. Paulette agreed without arguing. That surprised both of us. She asked if she could send a gift for Imogen. Arlo looked at me and I thought about it for a moment before nodding. He told his mother she could send something small to our address. The call ended shortly after that. We sat together in the quiet of our living room and I felt strange. Not relieved exactly, not hopeful. Just less tense than I'd been in months. A week passed. Imogen learned to clap her hands together and we celebrated like she'd won an award. Life continued in its normal rhythm of feedings and naps and laundry. Then a package arrived. The return address was Paulette's. I opened it carefully on the kitchen counter while Arlo watched over my shoulder. Inside was a baby blanket in soft yellow yarn with white edging. The stitching was neat and careful, handmade. There was also a children's book about a family of rabbits. A note card sat on top. Paulette had written that she made the blanket herself and hoped Imogen would use it. She said she remembered Arlo loving soft blankets as a baby and thought Imogen might too. The gesture felt more personal than expensive gifts would have been. It felt like actual effort instead of money. I ran my fingers over the blanket's texture and felt something shift slightly in my chest. Not forgiveness, not trust. Just a small softening toward the idea that reconciliation might eventually be possible. Arlo spread the blanket over Imogen during her next nap. She grabbed the edge of it in her tiny fist and pulled it close to her face. I took a photo of her sleeping with it and saved it to my phone without sending it to anyone. 2 days later, Fletcher called Arlo. I was washing bottles in the sink when Arlo answered and put it on speaker. Fletcher said he needed to tell us something. He said Paulette had been actively correcting family members who still believed her old accusations. She was telling them she was completely wrong about me. She was saying she damaged a good person's reputation because of her own issues. Fletcher said he'd heard this from 3 different relatives independently. He said Paulette wasn't just apologizing in private to us. She was doing the public work of fixing what she'd broken. This information mattered. It showed changed behavior beyond just writing us a nice letter. It showed she was willing to be uncomfortable and admit fault to people who might judge her for it. Arlo thanked Fletcher for letting us know. After he hung up, I stood at the sink with my hands in soapy water and tried to figure out how I felt. I called Natasha that afternoon. We met at the coffee shop near my apartment while Arlo stayed home with Imogen. I told her everything about the letter and the blanket and Fletcher's call. I asked if I was being too cautious or not cautious enough. Natasha stirred sugar into her coffee and looked at me seriously. She said protecting my daughter from someone who spent months calling her mother a cheater and liar was reasonable. She reminded me that Paulette didn't just insult me privately. She tried to convince an entire family that I'd trapped her son and passed off another man's baby as his. She said I got to control the terms of any reconciliation, and that making Paulette earn back trust was appropriate. I drove home feeling more settled in my boundaries. That evening, Arlo and I sat down at the dining table with a notebook. We wrote out specific conditions for any future contact with Paulette. She could never badmouth me to family again. Visits would be supervised. She had to respect our parenting decisions without criticism. The first sign of her old behavior meant immediate return to no contact. We wrote everything down in clear language. We both signed it at the bottom. Arlo scanned the document and emailed a copy to his parents. Stuart called back within an hour. He said the conditions were excessive. He said we were treating Paulette like a criminal when she'd already apologized. Arlo told his father that these were non-negotiable terms, and if they couldn't accept them, the estrangement would continue. Then Paulette's voice came through the phone. She must have taken it from Stuart. She told him to be quiet. She said she accepted all the conditions without reservation. She asked when she might be able to meet Imogen in person. Arlo said we needed at least another month of demonstrated good behavior before we'd consider it. Paulette agreed. During that month, updates came through Jacqueline. Paulette was correcting her past lies with extended family. She was working on herself. Jacqueline reported that Paulette had started seeing a therapist to work on her controlling behavior and pride issues. The information felt like genuine effort, like maybe Paulette was actually trying to change instead of just saying the right words to get what she wanted. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Paulette to get impatient or defensive or demanding. But the weeks passed and she stayed consistent. She sent brief updates through Jacqueline about her therapy sessions. She didn't push for faster reconciliation. She didn't make excuses or minimize what she'd done. I started to think that maybe seeing those photos of Imogen had actually broken something open in her. Maybe missing months of her granddaughter's life had finally made her face what her pride had cost her. My mom showed up the following weekend with her usual bags of groceries and a container of soup she'd made the night before. I met her at the door with Imogen on my hip, and she immediately took the baby from me and started making those grandmother noises that always made Imogen smile. She carried her granddaughter into the kitchen while I brought in the groceries, and by the time I joined them, she'd already settled into a chair with Imogen in her lap, examining her tiny fingers like they held secrets. I heated up the soup while she played with the baby, and we ate lunch together at the kitchen table with Imogen between us and her bouncer. After we finished eating, I told her about Paulette's letter and everything it said. I explained the conditions Arlo and I had written out and how we'd sent them to his parents. I described Stuart's reaction and how Paulette had accepted everything without argument. My mom listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, her face serious but not surprised. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She said she was proud of me for standing firm on boundaries while leaving room for reconciliation if Paulette proved herself. She reminded me that protecting myself and Imogen had to come first, always. Then she warned me to watch carefully for any signs of Paulette's old patterns returning, because people could say the right words without actually changing their behavior. She told me to trust my instincts and never let guilt override my judgment about what was safe for my daughter. I felt something settle in my chest hearing her say that, because sometimes I needed someone to confirm I wasn't being unreasonable or cruel. 6 weeks crawled by with Paulette maintaining her good behavior through Jacqueline's reports. She kept correcting her lies with family members. She kept going to therapy. She sent one brief note through Jacqueline asking if we'd received the blanket and hoping Imogen liked it, but she didn't push for more contact or complain about the timeline. Arlo and I talked about it multiple times during those weeks, always circling back to the same question of whether his mother was genuinely changing or just performing change to get what she wanted. Finally, we agreed to try a supervised meeting at the park 3 blocks from our apartment. The location felt safe because we could leave immediately if things went wrong, and it was neutral territory where Paulette couldn't corner us or make a scene. Jacqueline offered to come along as a buffer, and we accepted because having a witness made the whole thing feel less dangerous. She promised to stay nearby but give us space, ready to step in if Paulette showed any sign of her old behavior. We scheduled it for the following Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, giving ourselves the whole day to recover afterward if we needed it. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I kept running through scenarios in my head, imagining all the ways Paulette might react to seeing Imogen in person. Would she be able to hide her resentment toward me? Would she say something passive-aggressive that sounded innocent but carried her old venom? Would she try to take Imogen from my arms and claim some grandmother right to hold her first? Every time I started drifting off, another worry would jolt me awake, and I'd find myself staring at the ceiling in the dark. Arlo woke up around 3 in the morning and found me sitting up in bed. He pulled me back down against his chest and wrapped his arms around me. He promised we would leave immediately if his mother showed any sign of her old behavior. He reminded me that I was in control of this meeting and that Paulette only got to see Imogen because I was allowing it. His voice was steady and certain in the darkness, and I finally fell asleep around 4 with his hand rubbing slow circles on my back. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. We got Imogen ready and packed her diaper bag with extra supplies even though we'd only be gone an hour. Arlo loaded the stroller into the car while I buckled Imogen into her car seat, and neither of us said much during the short drive to the park. Jacqueline was already there when we arrived, sitting on a bench near the playground with a coffee cup in her hands. She waved when she saw us but didn't approach, letting us get Imogen out of the car and settled in the stroller at our own pace. The park was busy with other families enjoying the spring weather, kids running around the playground equipment, parents pushing swings. It felt surreal to be meeting Paulette in this normal, cheerful place after months of estrangement. We walked slowly toward the meeting spot, and that's when I saw her. Paulette was sitting alone on a bench near the fountain, wearing a simple blue sweater I'd never seen before. She looked smaller somehow, older, her shoulders curved forward like she was trying to make herself less noticeable. When she saw us approaching with the stroller, she stood up quickly but didn't move toward us. Her hand went to her mouth, and even from a distance, I could see her eyes filling with tears. She started crying before we even reached her, and my whole body went tense. I couldn't tell if these were manipulative tears meant to make us feel guilty or genuine emotion from seeing her granddaughter for the first time in months. We stopped about 10 feet away from her, and Arlo's hand found mine. Paulette stayed where she was, still crying but not approaching, and I realized she was waiting for permission. Arlo cleared his throat and told her she could come closer to see Imogen. She walked toward us carefully, like she was afraid we'd change our minds and run. When she reached the stroller, she knelt down beside it instead of standing over it, putting herself at Imogen's level. She just looked at our daughter for a long moment without saying anything. Imogen was awake and alert, her unusual eyes tracking the movement of other kids in the park. Paulette's hand hovered near the stroller handle but didn't touch it. Then she spoke, her voice rough from crying. She said Imogen was beautiful. She said she looked exactly like Arlo did as a baby, the same nose and chin and eyes. There was no defensiveness in her voice when she said it, no hint of the woman who'd insisted for months that the resemblance didn't exist. Just sadness and what sounded like regret. I watched her carefully, searching for any sign of the woman who'd accused me of trapping her son. I looked for the subtle digs disguised as compliments, the passive-aggressive comments about my parenting, the cold judgment in her eyes when she looked at me. But Paulette seemed genuinely humbled and ashamed as she knelt by the stroller. She looked up at me after a moment, tears still running down her face. She said she was sorry for everything she'd put me through. She said she was wrong about me from the very start, from the first family dinner when she'd decided I wasn't good enough for her son. She said she understood if I never fully forgave her because what she'd done was unforgivable. Her voice broke on that last word, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of believing she might actually mean what she was saying. Arlo asked his mother why she spread those lies about me, his voice harder than I'd heard it in weeks. Paulette stayed kneeling by the stroller but turned to look at him. She admitted she felt like she was losing control of her son's life and couldn't accept that he'd chosen someone without her approval. She said she'd spent his whole childhood imagining the woman he'd marry, someone from their social circle with the right family background, and when he brought me home instead, she couldn't let go of that fantasy. She said the pregnancy made it real in a way she couldn't deny anymore, so she'd tried to create doubt about me and about Imogen, because if she could make everyone else question my character, maybe she could convince herself she'd been right all along. She said seeing how much Imogen looked like Arlo in those recent photos forced her to confront that she'd been lying to herself and everyone else because of her own insecurity and need for control. Her hands were shaking as she spoke, and I could see the effort it took for her to say these things out loud. The visit lasted about 40 minutes. Paulette kept appropriate distance the whole time, never trying to hold Imogen without permission or reach into the stroller to touch her. She asked thoughtful questions about the baby's development, when she started sleeping through the night, whether she was eating well, if she'd started teething yet. She complimented my parenting when I answered, saying I was clearly doing an amazing job because Imogen looked so healthy and happy. There were no passive-aggressive digs hidden in her words, no subtle implications that I was doing something wrong. When Imogen started fussing, Paulette stepped back to give me space to pick her up and comfort her. She watched me settle the baby against my shoulder, and something in her face looked almost wistful. I started to believe she might actually be capable of change, that the therapy and time away from us had broken something open in her. As we prepared to leave, gathering up the diaper bag and getting ready to put Imogen back in the stroller, Paulette asked if we might consider another visit in a few weeks. Her voice was hesitant, like she was afraid of pushing too hard. Arlo looked at me for the decision, and I appreciated that he was letting me control this. I thought about the last 40 minutes, how Paulette had respected every boundary we'd set, how she'd stayed at a distance and waited for permission for everything. I told her we could try monthly supervised visits for now. I explained that if she continued respecting our boundaries and treating me with respect, we could gradually increase contact over time. I made it clear that this was conditional, and that any return to her old behavior would mean immediate return to no contact. Paulette thanked me with genuine gratitude in her voice. She said she knew she had to earn back our trust, and that she was willing to do whatever it took for however long it took. She didn't try to hug me or push for more than I was offering. She didn't ask to hold Imogen or suggest we come to her house for the next visit. She just accepted what I'd said and thanked us for giving her this chance. She stood back while we got Imogen settled in the stroller, and she was still standing there watching us when we walked away. For the first time since I'd met her, Paulette had truly respected my boundaries without trying to negotiate or manipulate her way around them. On the drive home, Imogen fell asleep in her car seat within minutes. Arlo reached over and squeezed my hand while keeping his eyes on the road. He asked how I was feeling about everything. I told him I was cautiously optimistic but still watching for any sign of Paulette slipping back into her old patterns. He nodded and said he understood my caution completely. Then he told me he was proud of how I handled the meeting. He said my willingness to give his mother a chance, even with all the strict conditions, meant everything to him. I looked out the window and said I wasn't doing it for Paulette. I was doing it for him and for Imogen, because they both deserved the chance at having a grandmother if she could actually change. He squeezed my hand tighter and didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. Over the next 2 months, we scheduled 3 more supervised visits with Paulette at the same park. Each visit went smoothly without any problems. Paulette maintained respectful behavior the entire time, and never once criticized me or questioned our parenting choices. She brought small, thoughtful gifts for Imogen at each visit: a soft stuffed rabbit, a set of board books, a musical toy that played gentle lullabies. She always asked permission before taking photos of Imogen. She stayed at whatever distance we indicated was appropriate. She complimented how well Imogen was developing without making it sound like a surprise. When Imogen started crawling between visits, Paulette celebrated the milestone with genuine excitement, and no comments about whether she was early or late compared to Arlo as a baby. She was showing us through consistent actions that she understood she was on probation and couldn't afford any mistakes. Fletcher called Arlo one evening to tell us something interesting he'd noticed at a family gathering. Extended family members had been commenting on the change in Paulette's behavior and attitude. She'd been consistently correcting the record about me whenever anyone brought up the old accusations. When someone mentioned the paternity concerns at a cousin's birthday party, Paulette immediately shut it down and told them she'd been completely wrong about everything. She apologized to the whole group for spreading lies about me and said I was a wonderful mother and wife. Fletcher said several relatives were shocked because they'd never heard Paulette admit she was wrong about anything before. After Fletcher's call, several relatives reached out to me directly to apologize for believing Paulette's lies. I accepted their apologies while mentally noting who had stood by me from the beginning and who had needed proof before changing their minds. Arlo and I celebrated our 3rd wedding anniversary on a quiet evening at home with Imogen between us on the couch. She was playing with her feet and making happy babbling sounds. Arlo put his arm around me and pulled me close. He told me that watching me stand firm on boundaries while still allowing room for his mother's redemption showed him what real strength looks like. Our relationship with Paulette would probably never be warm or close the way some families are. But we'd established a new dynamic where I controlled all the terms, and she respected my authority as Imogen's mother. Our little family stayed protected while allowing supervised grandmother visits that might gradually become less tense over time. I kissed Arlo and looked down at our daughter. She had his eyes and his smile and absolutely no doubt about where she came from. That was enough for me.